It was just a normal evening. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, mindlessly watching TV. I lived on a quiet street, one where you can leave your front door unlocked and not think twice about it. I had been living here for a year, and nothing had ever seemed out of the ordinary until tonight. It was around 10:30 when I heard it, the faintest sound, a creak. I wasn't sure if it was just the house settling or something, but it made me pause. I listened. The house was still. Then a thud. This time, it wasn't the wind or house shifting, it was something else. My stomach tightened. Maybe it had been a tree branch tapping against the window, or maybe I was just being paranoid. I tried to ignore it and went back to scrolling, but the noise came again. This time, it was closer. I stood up and crept towards the hallway, listening carefully. The second floor was quiet. I checked the doors. All were locked. The windows were shut tight. Everything seemed fine, but that nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I couldn't shake the thought that someone might be in my house. But how? I was sure I locked everything and I hadn't heard anyone enter. I tiptoed back to my living room, trying to keep my breath steady. The front door was still latched, but something was off. The air felt heavier, thicker. Then I heard it. Soft rustle, followed by a low creak. It was coming from upstairs. I froze. My mind raced. The only possible explanation was someone had gotten in. The question was, who? I grabbed my phone and my hands were shaking. I called the police, my voice barely above a whisper. There's someone in my house. Or I said something like that. I don't know if the intruder had heard me, but the adrenaline in my veins told me to move quickly. Please send someone. I couldn't just wait, I had to act. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from my kitchen drawer. Better than nothing. I started up the stairs. My footsteps felt loud in the silence, too loud. I couldn't seem to control my breathing. Every creak of the stairs underfoot made me jump. At the top of the stairs, I turned left into the hallway. The door to my bedroom was closed, but I could have sworn I heard movement behind it. Slowly, I reached for the handle. Just my fingertips touched the knob. I heard it, a faint sound, like someone dragging something across the floor. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped back, my mind screaming at me to get out, but I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. Do I confront them, or do I just run and hide? I can't risk running. If they are still in the house, I'd never make it to the door. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, came from inside the room. Someone was walking around. I needed to call for help again, but I couldn't move. The door to my bedroom creaked open. If I did, I might make myself a target. I was in the corner now, trapped between my own indecision. I was waiting for the worst. Then the footsteps stopped. My heart nearly stopped too. I stood there frozen, listening for everything, anything to tell me what's happening. And then, just as I was about to move, I heard a voice, soft and muffled, but unmistakable. You thought you were safe, didn't you? It was coming from the hallway, just outside the room. I held my breath. I tried to control my shaking, but I couldn't. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced back towards the hallway, and that's when I saw it, a shadow, shifting just out of view. I barely had time to react before the intruder stepped forward. It was a man, tall, disheveled. I don't know how long he had been standing there, but I was certain that he knew I was there now. I could see his hand twitch, like he was deciding whether to come closer. Just then, I heard the unmistakable sounds of sirens in the distance. My stomach twisted with a mix of hope and dread. The intruder turned towards the noise. He didn't say anything. He just turned back away slowly, glanced over his shoulder towards the window. He darted down the stairs, leaving me there, breathless and paralyzed. The police arrived a minute later, flooding the house, checking every room, finding only signs of his presence. A broken lock, a footprint outside, but he was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. After the police left, I stayed up, listening to every creak and crack in the house with a new, terrified awareness. The next day, I replaced the lock, put up a security camera, and now I double-check every door. But the thing that haunted me the most wasn't the broken lock. It was the way he looked at me, like he had been watching me for a long time, like he knew exactly when I'd be alone. I just woke up in the middle of the night remembering this and needed to get off my chest. When I was about 16, my dad, brothers, and I lived in an old, rundown house in the middle of nowhere. It was a private rental. My brother would do work for the landlord to pay for our rent. Our landlord never came off as creepy, but that could be because I rarely went outside when he came over to talk to my dad, and he wouldn't dare do anything in front of my dad. I was home alone one day. My dad and brothers went somewhere I don't remember. I had my dog in the fenced-in yard, but that was it. I was in my room doing whatever I was doing, probably playing Sims 2. We lived in the middle of nowhere, and there was a long driveway, which the window to my bedroom directly faced. I could see or hear anyone driving up our driveway. I saw the car, not my dad's, and immediately freaked out. I ran and shut all the blinds in the house, turning off all the lights, and checked that the doors were locked. It was our landlord. He lived next door, about 2 miles from the house. And yes, that was the closest house to us. This wasn't the first time that he had came by unexpectedly. It happened twice before, and both times I was home alone. The first 2 times he was only there for 10 minutes, walking around outside the house, and then quickly leaving. But this time was different. I grabbed a big kitchen knife and hid it under the kitchen table. I heard him pull up outside and open our front gate. My dog outside was going crazy and barking. I heard him yell, "Shut up, mutt." I could hear his footsteps walking up to the door. He tried to open the front door. I was freaking out. At this point, I texted my dad. He was coming straight home, but they would be like an hour. He continued to walk around outside our house, trying to peek into each window. The house is old and has 3 doors you can enter from the outside. He tried to open all 3. I thought maybe he didn't know I was home. Maybe the last 2 times were a coincidence, but he started saying things, including calling out my name. He knew I was home alone. I couldn't hear what else he was trying to say through the double brick walls, but I quietly crept through the house, following his voice up and down the hallway. I was trying to hear what he was saying. That's when he said something I'll never forget. "I'm gonna burn this house down, but I'll let you out first." Of course, I didn't take him seriously, which scares me even more. He wanted me to take his threat seriously. That's the part that gets me. I know exactly what would have happened if I believed him, and my life would have been completely different. He was there for at least 30 minutes, maybe closer to an hour. He was persistent. He left before my dad came home. I told him everything, and we moved out soon after. I still don't know how he knew I was home alone. My dad says he never saw him on the drive out, so he only knew that my dad was gone because there was no car in the driveway. But how did he know that I wasn't with him? It happened in 2022, just 2 months after I bought my first house, a remote old farm in central France, far from many neighbors except for an elderly woman who co-owned the land with me. I was living alone, 28 years old, and already dealing with a lot of bad luck. I had broke my right hand the very first day I moved in, and a month later, my horse accidentally broke my nose. One summer night, during a thunderstorm, I was sleeping in my room, nearly naked due to the heat, in the converted attic of my house. Around 11:30 p.m., I woke up to a strange noise coming from the room next door, like someone was standing behind the wall between our rooms. It wasn't the usual creaks of the wind or beams cracking. Though I doubted anyone could be in the house, I figured I should check it out just in case. The second room has an old stairway leading up to the attic and a door that opens directly to the inside. The undeveloped part of the attic was kind of a mezzanine. When I went to investigate the noise, still naked and nursing my fractures, I found the room empty, but the door leading outside was open. I climbed up to the mezzanine and saw a shadow dart under it, out of my view. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't sure what I had seen, but I quickly retreated back to my room, which unfortunately had no way of being locked. I positioned myself by the only window and called my ex, who was a police officer that lived just 10 minutes away. I figured that if the intruder came for me, I could escape through the window. It was also the best spot to see if anyone left the house. I had been practicing self-defense and martial arts for years, so if I did have to fight someone off, I preferred to do it myself rather than involve others. Luckily, no one came into my room before my ex arrived. When he got there, we searched around the house together but found nothing. Just when I thought it had all been a hallucination, we heard my ex's 6-year-old daughter screaming. She had been in the car outside alone while my ex came inside to help me. He told her that they were there to fix some plumbing issue. She had been locked in the car to keep her safe. When we rushed out to check on her, she was crying. When we asked why, she said that she saw a man coming out of the house through the old door that overlooked the attic. He then approached the car and shook the door handle, according to her. To this day, I still don't know who the man was, what he was doing in the room next to mine while I was sleeping, or what his intentions were. I can't quite figure out why I didn't just run away when I had the chance. Later, the elderly woman living nearby told me that someone knocked on her door during the night a few times. Then last year, I had another experience that was eerily similar. Maybe with the same man. This time, I witnessed it firsthand. The police arrived, but by then, it had been 50 minutes. I can tell that story another time. This is a story I haven't told anyone except my family, but it's been bothering me for years. When I was a child, our family home was divided into 3. One for my uncle and his 2 children, one for my mother and me, and the third stood empty after my great-grandfather died. It was a large, ugly house that had been targeted by burglars before. The first time was before I was born. The second time I was 5 and slept through it. Another time, someone was drunk and walking around our garden and rearranging things. Or every day at around 3 or 4 a.m., they were standing in front of our fence and looking into the windows. When I was 7 years old, things calmed down a bit. My drunk neighbor went to jail, and with him, many of these types of incidents disappeared. I remember it was a big event because my family allowed themselves to have animals. A neighbor was attacking other people's animals. We were able to get 3 cats and a dog from a shelter. The other neighbors became calmer too, but I still felt uncomfortable. I was a nervous and fearful child, and after all these stories, I still didn't like being left alone at home. So there was an unspoken agreement that if my uncle or cousins were leaving the house, even for a moment, they wouldn't tell me, so I didn't have to be afraid. Unfortunately, my cousin, then 23, came to see how I was doing one day. We chatted for a while. Then she told me that she was going to the shop. Of course, I panicked. I didn't want her to go, so I started crying. It ended with my cousin letting me go up to her room and watch cartoons, which was a pretty big deal because she was the only one with so many channels on TV. Her room was on the ground floor and had a window onto the neighbor's garden who had a barbecue at the time. I remember she used that as an argument. If anything happens, open the window and shout to them. Then she left and I focused on the cartoons. I remember I had already watched an entire episode of Dexter's Laboratory and had switched to the channel that had the Barbie movie on when I heard some sounds. At first, I assumed it was our pets, but the next sounds were more like footsteps and a door opening. Did my cousin come back from the shop? I didn't even get to finish the Barbie movie. I remember being more angry than scared at that point and decided to be quiet, so maybe it would take her a while before she threw me out of her room. But the noise was really annoying. Lots of footsteps, shuffling, and some barking from our dog. At one point, the sounds were close to my room. My cousin had a door with a window, one of those where you could barely see anything through it, only shadows. So when I turned around, all I saw was a figure with a gray or black outfit. Nothing special, no bright colors. It was hard to tell if they were a man or woman, so I once again assumed that it was my cousin and decided to stay quiet, hoping that she wouldn't come in. But I started to feel uncomfortable because the person was just standing there and doing nothing, right in front of the door. Finally, the person turned right into the kitchen and I went back to watching cartoons. Only shortly after, what everyone probably expected happened. I heard our front door open and a loud, "I'm back," from my cousin. This time, I also heard the sound of plastic bags. I remember being suddenly completely terrified, but before I could do anything, my cousin went to the kitchen and nothing happened. No screaming, no fighting. I literally sat in her room, now with the volume off, listening, but it sounded like normal unpacking of groceries. Then my cousin came over, and I started crying. I ended up telling her what happened, and she called the neighbors. Together, they searched the entire house, but they found no one. Nothing looked damaged, and in the next days, nothing had disappeared from the house. The rest of my family found out too. We confirmed that my uncle and mother were at work, and my second cousin was at school. The day it happened, we found our cat sleeping in my great-grandfather's apartment on the second floor, but my dog was nervous and spent the entire search around the neighbor's house whining. We never managed to solve it, but when I spoke to my cousin recently, she admitted that she spoke with my uncle about it a few years later, and they came to the conclusion that I must have imagined something. But I am 100% certain that I saw a person that day. Surprisingly, this is one of those stories I forgot about until a few days ago when I was talking to a school friend on the call and I got reminded of this. She was pretty freaked out when I told her, and so did I thinking about it again. This happened when I was roughly maybe 7 or 8, so some of the details are fuzzy, although I remember it pretty vividly. This may seem like unimportant context, but my family had just moved to America and we were renting the top portion of a regular suburban house in a pretty safe cul-de-sac. I had friends, they were triplets, about 3 or 4 houses down, not far at all. Every day I would go hang out with them, and around 9 or 10 at night, my brother, around 11 or 12 I would say, would make the 2-minute walk to come get me and walk me home since I was still pretty young. One night he came to get me as usual. The sun wasn't fully down, but it was getting pretty dark. We started the walk as normal when he started casting glances over his shoulder. I didn't really notice until he shoved me hard away from the sidewalk and between 2 houses. Each house had a huge fence that separated their backyards, not ours though, and he made me crouch behind the fence. I remember being really scared, but more confused since I had no damn idea what was going on. More specifically, he was a pretty big prankster, so I didn't really believe him when he turned around and said, "Walk behind the houses. I think someone's following us." Looking back now, he was probably trying to keep me calm. However, whatever calm was still left in my tiny 8-year-old body was gone the moment I turned around and looked. The man had followed us behind the houses, and he was just by the edge of a few houses down near a different fence line. He had a black hoodie on, with the hood up, black sweatpants, and white sneakers. I have pretty bad eyesight now due to some health problems, but back then it was crystal clear and I could see with horrifying clarity that his jaw hung open. Like he was just standing there with his jaw hung open. It was terrifying. I think now that I'm older, maybe he had some kind of medical condition that affected his jaw. Or maybe he just did crack. I don't know. But back then I could have sworn on God I was seeing some kind of demon. Anyway, my brother, when he saw him looking and me about to freak out, told me to just run as fast as I could to our house. We booked it, neither of us looking back, but we were scared out of our minds. Like I said, we rented the top portion of the house, so the bottom, with a sliding door in the backyard, belonged to some other tenant. I don't remember if she was home or not, but I remember tugging that thing open and locking it as fast as I could. And when I looked up, he was there in our yard, a little bit away from the door, staring at us. Me and my brother told my sister and mom immediately. My father was away on a work trip, but nothing came of it. Not until the day after. We went to go meet my dad at his warehouse, which had a small live-in portion above it. We lazed around until he was ready to head home. Around dusk, he came and told us that we might have to wait since the police were there. He walked us around to the back window of a small area to show us all the police around the back area of the warehouse, to a white van parked on the grass by the edge of the woods. Like I said, I was pretty young, so I don't remember many details about what actually happened, but I do remember my dad telling us they found a man and a woman in the van. The man, he said, had a mouth hung wide open. He seemed really disturbed telling me about the whole thing and wouldn't answer any more questions about the woman. I do know that they were arrested on trespassing charges. I don't know anything else, and I haven't asked about it, and I doubt he would remember. It's been over a decade and he's pushing 70, but it freaks me out to this day. I still can't believe what happened, and I don't have any answers for it. I talked to my brother briefly about it in hopes that he would remember more than I do. But all I got was a long tirade and whatever medical condition this guy probably had for his mouth to be like that. He's an annoying medical student now. Sometimes I think that he didn't mean any harm and was just drugged out of his mind. But this is like the world's safest neighborhood, and it doesn't explain why or how he showed up at my dad's workplace. Edit. If anyone's curious, I asked around for a little more information. I wasn't able to find a lot, but I did find out why my father moved away from that warehouse. The police found a dead body in the car near us. I'm not sure if it's the same van or not, or when that happened, but take it as you will. It was a typical Wednesday evening. I just finished dinner and was sitting on the couch in my living room, playing a game on my phone. I had moved into this apartment a few months ago, and everything felt comfortable. The building was old, but the neighbors seemed nice enough. Just enough interaction to keep things polite. My apartment had big windows that faced a small courtyard. I liked the natural light it brought in, especially at night from the street lights. I was sitting near the window, the blinds pulled up slightly. Just enough for me to see the outside world, but not enough for people to see fully in. Or at least that's what I thought. I started watching TV alone in my pajamas when I noticed something strange. A shadow in the corner of my window. I froze, staring at the outline. For a moment I thought it was just a tree branch swaying, but then it moved differently. Then I thought, maybe it's just my neighbor walking by, but it stayed in place just behind the curtain. I pulled it back slightly to look out. I could see the silhouette of someone standing perfectly still for what felt like an eternity. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that my imagination was running wild, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Slowly, I slid the curtain back down, making sure the window was completely covered. My mind spinning with all the possible explanations. Maybe it was just someone walking by or someone waiting for a friend in the courtyard, but something felt off. I couldn't even see which direction the person was facing. I tried to brush it off and went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. The image of someone standing outside my window kept creeping into my mind. What if it was a prank? A neighbor who thought it would be funny? Or worse, what if it wasn't a prank at all? The next few days, the feeling lingered. I kept my blinds down almost completely, but it didn't stop the anxiety. Every time I heard footsteps outside, I couldn't help but peek out the window. my heart pounding in my chest, but I never saw anything out of the ordinary. I convinced myself that I was just being paranoid, that nothing had really happened. That wasn't until one night, a week later. It was after midnight. I was laying in bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to fall asleep. My window was cracked open just a little, enough for some fresh air, but not enough to be noticed from outside. I could hear a faint rustling of leaves outside. I closed my eyes, ignoring the noise, when I heard it. A soft tapping sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then it came again, closer this time. 3 taps. My heart thudded in my chest, but I didn't open my eyes. The tapping didn't stop. It grew more deliberate, closer, like someone was trying to get my attention without making a sound. I didn't move. I honestly was frozen, like I didn't even want to breathe too loudly. I told myself it was just my imagination, or just some regular noise outside my window. But the longer it continued, the more certain I was that it was a person. Then 3 more taps, then the sound stopped. I held my breath, waiting, but then the most chilling thing happened. I heard a voice quietly, just barely audible. "Are you awake?" I froze. The voice came from right outside my window. I knew in that moment, without a shadow of doubt, that someone was standing there watching me. I couldn't move. I was too terrified to even call the police. What if they left before help arrived? What if it was someone I knew? My mind was racing, but I couldn't let it go. I slowly grabbed my phone and texted my best friend. I told her that someone was outside my window and that I didn't know what to do. I didn't expect her to reply at that hour, but I needed to do something. I glanced over at the window. The blinds were slightly open, just a sliver. That's when I saw it. The shadow again, much closer than before. A figure just standing behind the edge of the curtain, watching me. I wanted to scream and shout, but I couldn't make a sound. The person stayed still for what felt like hours. My phone buzzed with the message from my friend, but I couldn't take my eyes off the window. The figure finally moved, taking a step back. I don't know where they went, but I heard the faintest footsteps retreating into the darkness through the courtyard. I stayed there wide awake until the first light of dawn broke through the blinds. The next morning, I went outside and checked the area around my window. There was no obvious signs of anyone being there, no footprints or disturbances, but as I looked closer, I found something chilling. A single smudge on my window pane, barely visible but there. The person never came back again, but the feeling of being watched never went away. I installed heavier blinds, a security camera, but could never shake the sensation that someone was always nearby, just outside my view, watching. And honestly, that apartment no longer felt like home. To this day, every time I hear rustling of leaves outside my window, my heart skips a beat.